Okay. And that progress feels good on the shed, guys. It looks really nice. All right. How we feeling? Mid-afternoon? Almost nap time. Got some sleepy eyeballs. Yeah. All right. Almost ready, Adam?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Welcome to Masculinity and Mental Health 3. This is the final slideshow. Period. You guys made it. Let's go to the next slide. Start with an agenda. All right, we're going to talk about 4 different things here. We're going to talk about the historical masculine. We're going to ask whether gender still matters. We're going to talk about sexual difference, what we actually know versus our folk wisdom and social ideas about it. And then finally, we're going to talk about metamodern masculinity, or what the future of masculinity might look like. Okay? The historical masculine. So let's talk a little bit about the roots of masculinity and the history and how we got some of the most important ideas about it and feelings about it as well, sort of as our culture constructs it today. Next slide. So we really have to start in Rome to understand the sort of structure of masculinity that persists today. There's, of course, older ideas, and, men have been men for a very long time. But some of the most foundational ideas of masculinity come from Rome, at least the ones that we operate on. So there's 3 major ones I want to talk about today. And the first one is the idea that masculinity is virtue. All right, now, of course, you can find this anthropologically all the way back 12,000 BC. You can find it in tribes that, weren't contacted till the last couple of 100 years. But Rome codified it in a concept called virtus. And virtus is literally vir means man. So is this idea, this expectation that without virtue, right, meant like to be a man meant to be virtuous. And Rome actually excluded a bunch of male people from virtus and from being a man, right? Like the lower classes, for instance, weren't held to this, and it sort of wasn't expected from them until, it was a useful social tool to kind of bludgeon them with it. But generally speaking, virtus, this kind of concept, was sort of really codified and cemented in Rome. And so that's what they use to kind of separate men from women and children, which is an equivalent idea. Virtus is an equivalent idea to arete in Greek, which is also the dharma in Indian. It's this idea, this felt sense of what's excellent, or this felt sense of what's quality, what's good. Okay? Virtus in Rome meant self-control, dominance, morality, especially piety, and the ability to govern. Right? So these were sort of the core of virtus. Number 2, patriarchy was law in Rome, which is to say family was the cornerstone of Roman social life, and the law gave jurisdiction to fathers, which we talked about a little bit before, gave them life or death power over their families, the ability to sell kids into slavery. They owned all the property. They could decide who their daughters married. They could decide who adopted who. So they had really sole power over the family, life and death. There are, like we talked about, there are some of these structures, some of these assumptions can be found historically in some of the assumptions we make today. But when people talk about patriarchy today or America being patriarchal, it's nothing like the patriarchy of the past. It's nothing like the patriarchy of history, okay? And 3, in Rome, they really believed women are naturally subordinate. So they were expected to be chaste, domestic, and dutiful. They were not allowed to own almost any property or to directly participate in public spheres. But Rome made an exception, and this is pretty telling. Widows and virgins had a lot of autonomy and respect. So basically, there were really, really strict controls over women's duty to men or women's power toward men when they were in relationship. But if a woman said, I'm not going to be with a man, I'm going to either be a virgin or I'm going to join a cult that keeps me chaste the rest of my life or celibate, or she was a widow and in between husbands, they were sort of just expected to be on their own program. They often could own property. They often did enjoy quite a lot of respect. And in some cases, right, even quite a lot of political power, such as in Augustus's wife. So it was strange, but what Rome was really concerned with was women's sexual power and their ability to sort of hurt men, right? Their ability to hurt men domestically and within the family. Okay, next up, medieval. So we get like 3 key ideas. All of these ideas that I'm sort of presenting now are either foundations of things we work with now or help to kind of build to understand like where we get our concept of masculinity. So this is the first time we really start to see that masculinity needs to be proven, right? So conflict, competition in many spheres of life start popping up. So the stuff we know about is like knights jousting in tournaments. We're pretty familiar with that stuff. But like scholars were intensely competitive with each other across universities. Like monks and priests would get super competitive with each other. It was just like, in medieval Europe, at least, this was just an assumed natural, sort of in the water of masculinity. It wasn't necessarily like that in Rome, and it wasn't necessarily like that in other eras. But when we get that kind of idea of like reflexive competitiveness, it really started here. Okay, so we kind of first get the idea of to be a man is to win in competition, right? So number 2, masculinity becomes tense and contradictory. So the ideal man was something like King Arthur, right? So heroic, skilled in battle, spiritual, nonviolent, romantic, courtly, an excellent lover as well as an intellectual. That's a lot, man. That's a lot. I mean, does anybody feel pressure to be all those things now? I do. Yeah, you do. Yeah. So embodying the virtues of masculinity becomes really difficult or even impossible, right? In a lot of situations. So this is kind of the first time we start to see how culture puts people in a double bind. And I mean, women know this one very well as well. This is not unique to us, right? So 3, we start to get multiple masculinities. So we start to get multiple seats of power saying, this is what it means to be a man. No, this is what it means to be a man. No, this is what it means to be a man. So secular masculinity remains pretty pagan in the sense that it emphasizes glory and sexual performance and the Roman ideals of patriarchy. But the church actually starts pushing a competing narrative that's marked by self-control, celibacy, nonviolence, right? And this becomes kind of an inner conflict for a lot of men. Like this becomes an external and internal conflict for a lot of men. All right. The church was also at the time, really pushing for a change to the way that femininity was treated in terms of Marian worship and, sort of like pushing the Christian ideal of femininity, which created a similar tension at the time. Okay. Early modern England is where we'll go next, even though the medieval period was really long. Some other kind of key concepts came about around this time. So right around this time, rationality entered the picture. So who, as part of masculinity, who here feels a pressure to be rational? If you want to be masculine, you have to be rational. Or when you are irrational, do you feel masculine? No, right? So that started coming about in early modern England. Rationality became the extra component along with dominance and self-control to kind of for men to set themselves apart from women, who were, not as well educated because they weren't allowed into most educational institutions, but also much more emotionally expressive as women are kind of in all times and places. This is just a regular thing. So on that note, number two, the passions become very unmanly. Masculinity really takes on this Anglo flavor, where we get this kind of extra stoicism, this extra stiff upper lip, this extra sort of, even more so than you would expect from Roman virtus and self-control and those sorts of things. It's like any kind of displays of emotion are thought to be unmanly. And it's right around this time too that you see literature and art starts to feature a lot of really high drama among male characters. And it's possible there was a kind of compensatory effect happening where it's like men can't express their emotions at all in society, and so Shakespeare does it for you, right? And then finally, full manhood also meant economic independence. So true men were expected to own their own businesses and firms, and the working classes and apprentices were not considered full men. So they were supposed to say sir and Mr. this and Mr. that, and sort of like there was a separate class of sort of lower class masculinity that was supposed to be subordinate to those who owned their own companies and firms. All right. Does anyone here feel pressure to own your own company or be a founder, stuff like that as part of being a man? Couple of hands. Yeah. All right. Next up, 19th century American. Things get really pertinent here, right? So masculine roles evolve and the lower classes also become men. This was a big development. And then archetypes that we still see today started to really reflect, especially in newspapers, especially in drama of the time. So we started seeing things like the genteel patriarch, who was like the benevolent and kind father. We started seeing, and I just mean in media, it's not like there were no kind fathers before the 19th century, but like the sort of idea of like that would eventually become Mr. Rogers and would eventually become like what we think of as like, loving dad on TV. Like this archetype really started to come around this time. We got the heroic artisan, who was the skilled independent laborer. Hipsters took that one up most recently. Right, that became quite a staple of like early 21st century masculinity. And then we got the self-made man. We got the self-educated entrepreneur. The kind of Ayn Randian, although this was before Ayn Rand. Right? We got the kind of the robber barons. We got the industrialists. We got those kind of guys, sort of like pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. Same time as Nietzsche was talking about the Übermensch and sort of all this kind of stuff. Does anyone here feel like the self-made man is like an important narrative for them to have like pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and done everything they could? Yeah, about half the room. It is to me. It is to me, So how about, the next one, restrained manhood versus martial manhood. So kind of the first time we really see competing visions for manhood, especially in the lead up to the Civil War. Right, we've got the moral, domestic, peaceful, religious echoes of church versus secular from the medieval times. And then you've got the martial forms, which are aggressive, adventurous, imperial, that sort of thing. Do you guys want to guess which direction the moral, domestic, and peaceful tended to live on versus the other ones? It's pretty obvious, right? Like north versus south, right? So you can still see these visions of masculinity and manliness in the culture war today. And it's not like all of the, martial men were all Southerners. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was, pretty classically like adventurous and imperial and defined defined masculinity for generations. And finally, right, cowboys and frontiersmen. We're just talking about Teddy Roosevelt. He was Rough Rider and a colonel on horseback cavalry and known for killing mountain lions with his own knife and just all kinds of crazy stuff, domesticating moose and riding them across rivers. The guy was just like an insane outdoorsman and adventurer and the president. And so kind of pretty legendary American figure there. But we also got the cowboy, right? That fighting, independent, wild, masculine spirit, which is still going now. It's still legendary for us now. Even if it's a little bit kind of cheesy these days. You'd be amazed how much of John Wayne is still swaggering around in guys walking around the mall. You know what I mean? All right, 20th century American masculinity joins the war efforts, which is to say this is around the time that propaganda really ramps up, especially in World War I, where masculinity becomes sort of this core staple of how they recruit enough men to fight in the war. So the 20th century was rife with global conflict. I don't need to go over that with you guys again. The whole world was at war almost the entire century. So masculinity really, became not only a propaganda tool, but as a propaganda tool, started to take its own shapes, like once it hit mass media. So one of the most salient one that's still with us today is the idea of muscular Christianity. So it's this idea that like to be Christian means to be really physically fit, means to be, sort of able-bodied and ready to be drafted and ready to fight for your country and sort of all this kind of stuff. So we started to see the early kind of conflation of religion and nationalism around this time. And in a lot of ways, World War I was the last religious war. Like, and it really was a very, very religious war in terms of the way that they thought about it and their messaging was about it. At this time, unenlisted men or men that did not fight in the war began to be seen as cowards and a sort of lower form of men. And so that sort of began to open up. And we still see echoes of that now in the kind of outsized respect that our culture gives veterans and gives people in the military. Right? They still kind of get an automatic status. And it's not always because somebody is genuinely thinking of their courage or genuinely thinking of their virtue or whatever. We just kind of have this idea that ranks people, right? So it's almost reflexive. All right, okay, so the second one here, mass media defines culture and gender. We talked about this a little bit, but radio and poster propaganda really starts to aggressively shape attitudes about gender. This is about the time that vernacular gender, or which is to say the way of doing gender that was sort of timeless and passed down from generation to generation in a pattern language really starts to deteriorate, and sort of only the hyper-real symbols are left. Only the suits and the muscles and the sort of, almost childish, cartoonish parts of masculinity that can be easily conveyed in a poster or in a presentation or whatever. Those are the things that kind of come to be known as masculinity. Later on, the influence of magazines and television would become hegemonic over cultural concepts of gender. And we don't talk about how they affect men quite as much, but something like 20% of young women get an eating disorder in their life. Something like 11% of men get it. And these are 100% absolutely tied to media. We're bombarded with images of ideal gender archetypes and all these things like constantly. And it's so banal at this point, we don't even talk about it, right? Like we're just like, well, nobody's going to do anything about it. It's not like anybody's going to get off their phones or stop looking at the TV or anything. So it's like, why even bother? Well, okay, it's still making everybody insane. So it's like worth putting it out there for people to understand, in case you're just catching up. And then the third part here is society and the economy, especially in the late part of the 20th century, begin to feminize. So in the late 20th century, feminism and especially deindustrialization lead to a decrease in masculinity as a socioeconomic priority. So neither society nor corporations nor the economy need men to be as physically strong as it used to, or need men to be as sort of like have the same sort of composition of virtues that they did previously to keep things chugging along. Also, the Pax Americana started sometime shortly after the Korean War. And so martial virtue and muscular Christianity sort of started to wane around that time. Globalization started to kind of change the way that we do business and change the way that we sell goods and all of that kind of stuff. And things got extremely scrambled in the 1990s and eventually led us to the 21st century American masculinity. So at this point, we've had a third century of masculinity in crisis, starting in the 19th century, right? And then all the way up now. And what the crisis looks like now is economic precarity, especially feminism and cultural revolution, and then rapid technological change. And all three of these things. So, I mean, just real quick, how many people in this room's job is just laptop? That's almost everybody, right? So your job is just laptop. Like what does masculinity mean then to your job anyway, right? We really need to figure this out. What does that mean? So there's a real challenge to gender roles because a lot of this stuff has been practiced for a long time, but it's no longer germane to our sort of everyday life, at least economically. And so obviously we got a lot of questions, and we'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. But a lot of historical narratives about masculinity right now, at least, are functionally obsolete. That doesn't mean that if history were to change and suddenly we needed men to be men again for disasters or wars or whatever the case might be, that all those narratives wouldn't come back to life. That at least where we're at right now, a lot of that stuff's dormant. It's kind of obsolete. Okay? Oh, number two, the American Cultural Revolution, or what we might call the awakening, or whatever you want to call the last 15 years of social justice, cultural hegemony. A decentralized, internet-driven progressive movement, primarily driven by feminism, which exacerbates sexual and racial tensions and stokes reactionary sentiment. And the culture war reaches the highest levels of government, right? Trump is very obviously like a natural culture warrior. Biden didn't shy away from it either. We just kind of expect this at the highest level of government now. We've got kind of a cold civil war happening, maybe starting to warm up, hopefully not. But with all the violence recently, things are getting kind of scary. Vote number three, the masculine mental health crisis. So this is still not very well understood because we're studying everything that leads to it. One thing we do know is that 2/3 of Gen Z men report feeling disconnected from their loved ones, and 45% of Gen Z men report suicidal thoughts in the last year. Let that sink in for a second. 1/2 of Gen Z is suicidal. All right. This could be hyper-individualism. This could be social isolation. This could be COVID-19 lockdowns. This could be lack of access to mental health care. This could be any of the stuff we've talked about with the way that education has been feminized and no longer, it could be 15 years of being demonized at some of the most tender years of your life. Gen Z certainly lived through that. 45%. 45%. Okay? We're not, that's a crisis of masculinity. Okay. Does gender still matter? When postmodernity is the milieu, and when everybody's job is laptop, does gender kind of only mean the movies? Does it only mean, is it all just drag, baby? Is that all it is, Judith Butler, right? Well, I don't know. What are some ways that masculinity still shows up in romance and sex? I'm not going to tell you guys. Now I'm asking you.
Could men please be normal?
Could men please be normal? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, women still have a lot of expectations of how men are going to act when it comes to romance, right?
We're still generally expected to make the first move.
Yeah. Still expected to take the initiative. What else? A lot of responsibility when it comes to sex and consent, right? Money. Got to pay for it. Even though the gender pay gap is fully accounted for by childbearing years. Right? What else? How about raising a family? Are there masculine ideals that we have to live up to when it comes to being a dad? Or do you feel pressure as a man to become a dad and raise a family and worry about the fertility crisis and all of that stuff? Settle down, be a good husband? Not so much?
I think so. I think the buck stops with men in terms of providing financially for the family to persist. Like an unemployed man will affect a lot more relationships than an unemployed woman.
Why do you say that?
Oh, I don't want to dig myself too deep on camera.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. But, you know, in an economy where both men and women are working, women prefer to work less, right? Men prefer to work more. So there's that. We can account for that. But where's the responsibility come down? It's an expectation, right? And that's okay. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it is a cultural expectation of masculinity. That's one way it plays into raising a family.
Yeah, I don't mind it all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind many masculine ideals and expectations. The world would suck without them. Yeah. So how about health? What are some ways that being a man directly impacts your health? We talked about the mental health part. What about physical?
Generally expected to do more physical labor.
Yeah. Yeah. Expect to do more physical labor. What else?
Expected to sacrifice your body for the benefit of others.
Yeah. Expected to sacrifice your body for the benefit of others. What about medical care? About access to medical care or the way you get treated at the hospital?
Potentially less likely to seek it out.
Yeah, we're a lot less likely to seek it out. Yeah.
The most dangerous jobs still have more men on average.
That's right. That's right. Far and away. Yeah, I don't remember the exact statistic right now. I want to say it's something like 90% of on-the-job injuries go to men. So how about work? I know work is very like HRified at this point, and it's supposed to be kind of gender neutral, but like, what does that actually mean in practice? Like, how does masculinity affect you in the workplace? Nobody's face is on camera, you guys. Does this feel hard to talk about? Does this feel taboo to talk about? Some nods. Yeah.
I think it was a benefit for me personally.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was leading a tribe.
So masculinity benefited you because, okay, got it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it still works in our favor in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
where we're more likely to negotiate, to ask for what we want.
True.
More directly.
True.
Get it.
Mm-hmm.
And compete, like the competitiveness.
Mm-hmm. More likely to compete too.
Expected to.
Mm-hmm. Are there a lot of policies or affirmative action that helps you guys out? Was there a lot of policies and affirmative action that helps women out? Yeah.
I'd say I wouldn't want to be an academic right now.
Yeah, me either, man. Yeah. I actually wanted to be an English teacher and then sort of like saw the landscape and was like, maybe I'll start a company instead. Maybe that's not so good of an idea right now. I know a guy who was an English teacher for years and wasn't able to get a job anywhere because they just said they stopped hiring white guys. You know? So how about education? I mean, obviously we went over that in the first slideshow, right? We know the ways that education still affects men in the 2020s. We know that women are getting college degrees at something like 10 points more, right? 55 to 45, something like that. We're being pretty radically outperformed. Right? How about social life? Does masculinity matter in your social life? Among friends, among...
Yeah, I think I remember reading that an unemployed man is much more likely to isolate unemployed women to like reach out to connection.
Mm-hmm.
With shame.
Shame. More shame, yeah. How about physical appearance? Are we still doing, what do you got?
Social life, I guess I was thinking maybe there's less fraternal organizations or something. There's less like just men's groups.
Yeah.
It's only is stuff.
Well, what does the YMCA stand for? It was the Young Men's Christian Association.
Yeah.
Not very family friendly. It's just different. No, the fraternal element.
Yeah, there's no Boy Scouts anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All right? There's Girl Scouts and there's Scouting of America or something. There's no Boy Scouts. So...
as soon as men get together and form their own groups, it's like society thinks that they're up to some no good.
Yeah. People get suspicious. They get worried about it, right? Like, why are you only allowing men in? Yeah. It's frightening. Does gender still affect physical appearance? Are we still dressing differently than women and styling our hair differently than women and smelling differently than women? We probably can't help that.
Sorry. Also, I think the body dysphoria among Gen's emails is probably more than it was for previous generations. Like, I think the social media thing is too, is like a kid that played baseball that became like a steroid influencer.
Yeah.
Started taking steroid, like testosterone at 20 years old, you know?
Wow.
Like, what for? Blow up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. How about religion? Law, religion has gotten pretty equal in a lot of the more like liberal branches of Christianity and, you know, Reform Judaism and those sorts of things. But I mean, gender is still pretty pertinent when it comes to being a Catholic or when it comes to being a Mormon or when it comes to being, right, most standard sort of evangelical denominations, right? I say standard evangelical denominations because I'm Catholic, so that's kind of all like the same thing. Sorry to all my Protestants sitting out there. But, right, so it still matters to religion, and then law, where does the law still interact between sex and gender? Because functionally, we're legally equal in nearly every sphere of the law, but how about enforcement?
You mean like cops?
Huh?
You mean like cops?
I mean like courts, I mean like cops, I mean we're way more likely to commit crimes, like, let's be real, you know. But also we get way harsher penalties for the same crimes than women do, right? Because we're presumed to have an outsized responsibility and an outsized impact, right? That's gender.
This disparate impact only goes one direction.
Yeah, disparate impact only goes one direction. Yeah. Yeah, so you know, we kind of get this message a lot that like gender doesn't still matter, but as far as I can tell, there isn't a single domain of life that it doesn't completely saturate at every level. It still matters a lot, right? So what are the actual sexual differences between men and women that we can, at least as far as we can tell? With the huge caveat that psychology is not a science and half of this stuff isn't going to replicate in 5 years because that's how psychology works. Well, personality-wise, all right, on average, women tend to experience higher anxiety, less emotional resilience, and greater instability of affect, which is to say they have a lot more emotions. They show a lot more emotions than we do. Does that track with your guys' experience of women? Yeah.
Greater agreeableness too.
We'll get to that. Yeah, they're warmer, they're more compassionate, and they're more cooperative. Does that also track?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you ever get a scientific, psychological study result that like really surprises you, like, wait a minute, like that's totally counterintuitive, just assume that it's wrong until it replicates like many times, because you've been living on this planet for as long as you have, and like the amount of data that you've gathered about men and women and human beings has formed a pretty durable intuition that you should trust much more than some like weird surprising study. Okay, so women tend to be higher in openness to feelings and aesthetics and lower in exploitative and manipulative behaviors. Does that track? And finally, they are lower in leadership qualities traditionally, and that's across cultures. Does that track? Do men tend to be leaders more often? Is that always because of the patriarchy? No. What else? Cognition. All right, women tend to be slightly better at verbal fluency, and they have better memories than us. We all know that one. Men tend to be better at shape rotation, spatial visualization, and navigation, right? Men also have much faster reaction times. We tend to be a little bit better, it's a weak effect, but a little bit better at reflective thinking, which is to say avoiding intuitive errors in cognition, But women are better at impulse control for the promise of a future reward. Does this all track? This makes sense? Sound like men and women to you? So behavior, this is a real shocker. Men are more physically aggressive. Women are equally aggressive, but indirectly. When they are aggressive socially and relationally. So men attack the physical body, women attack the symbolic body, which is to say the ego and the relationships. Okay? Men tend to be more trusting than women, and women tend to socially camouflage, which is to say they mask more often than men. Does that make sense? So what are some possible sexual differences that we're not sure about yet? Or that we may not even be able to prove scientifically, right? So the first one is the greater male variability hypothesis. Is anyone here not familiar with this? Okay, a couple of you, a lot of you. All right. The greater male variability hypothesis, boiled down to a nutshell, says more geniuses, more idiots. That like men tend to cluster at the extremes of traits and bell curves. So you'll find a lot more women sort of in the reasonable middle and a lot more guys because of testosterone and because of, being men. You'll find way more criminals and you'll find way more guys like outshining everybody else in the field. So this makes some intuitive sense in what we see and what we've seen throughout history. And when we measure what's currently going on, again, nature, nurture, it's literally impossible for us to separate these. For a bunch of reasons, we can't run like medical quality studies with psychology, mostly for ethical reasons. And so a lot of this stuff, like we can't actually really establish with a high degree of confidence. But right now, most of our psychological testing shows men are on the sort of further ends of the bell curve when it comes to intelligence, risk-taking, and creativity. We just have a wider standard deviation and distribution. So this would explain why there are many more men in elite stations in society and many more at the bottom, which is to say intellectually disabled or incarcerated or whatever the case might be. Number 2, evolutionary psychology. So evolutionary psychology basically proposes that sex differences have adaptive origins, like that women have different strategies and levels of parental investment than men do, and that there's a lot of effect on women's unconscious by their menstrual cycles. The idea behind it is that evolutionary biology is more powerful generally than culture in free societies. So the problem is evolutionary psychology relies on a lot of just so stories and a lot of sort of concepts that we can't actually establish ever existed, sort of like states of grace or like maybe human beings were like this 50,000, 100,000 years ago, and that's why we're like this now. But we don't actually know how human beings were 50 or 100,000 years ago. We've been around for 2.7 million years as Homo sapiens, but we've only got like a few scant records that go back as further than 10,000 years. Right? So like evopsych, did evolution stop at the neck? Almost certainly not. Is there any good way for us to study this with a high degree of confidence? Almost certainly not. So that's where we're at with evopsych. Make sense? Anytime you hear from the evopsych guys, you should just bracket like this is unfalsifiable, right? So you may get some things with explanatory or predictive power, but it's unfalsifiable. So just keep that in your back pocket. Third thing, neurological. We're starting to get good enough neurological imaging that we're starting to get some ideas about the difference between male and female brains. Results are pretty inconclusive and all over the place, but brain imaging studies suggest a few big differences. Men seem to be more analytical and systematizing, and women seem to be more social and emotional. Is this a big surprise to anybody? I got $10 says this replicates. Prenatal testosterone exposure masculinizes the brain. We're not totally sure about this, but this seems to have some grounding in neurology. So you start to, the sex differences in cognition, aggression, and behavior may have to do with androgens in the womb. One thing that's pretty interesting, if you look at your hands, most guys have ring fingers that are longer than their pointer fingers. And that we know is tied to androgen exposure in the womb. Trans women almost always, like cisgender women, have pointer fingers that are longer than ring fingers. So it suggests that there's something with trans women has to do with androgen exposure in the womb. Okay? Like they literally didn't get masculinized, even though they're male, or they were born male, right? And then finally, autism and schizophrenia may be on a spectrum together. It could be that autism is something like way too strong of a sense of the self, where the boundaries of the self become torturous and they become trapped inside a kind of prison. And schizophrenia is like way too weak of boundaries of the self, where like you can't tell whether street signs are talking to you because you can't tell the difference between self and other. And then somewhere in the middle of this, and there's some evidence that we're kind of pointing at that suggests that maybe autism, or the likelihood of autism, comes from parental genes, and the likelihood for schizophrenia comes from maternal genes. And so you might have this, there may be a neurological difference between men and women there. Make sense? We do see a lot more autism in men than women, right? We don't see a lot more schizophrenia in women than men, so this is it's complicated. Do we have any questions before we move on to the next thing about actual and possible sexual differences? There's not actually a whole lot, is there?
I'm going to add one.
What?
Interests in people versus objects and ideas, which manifests itself a lot in career choice and gets stronger in more egalitarian societies.
We have a lot of social data that says this. A lot of qualitative data. We're unable to make a hard and fast interpretation that says this is because male XY and because female XX, right? It's like it's not totally clear where social influences and cultural influences make that the case versus biological influences, and that's why it's kind of hard to say. We know this belongs to men for sure, and we know this belongs to women for sure. But yeah, you're right, pretty durably, where they get the choice. Women tend to go more into social emotional. We tend to go more into object-oriented, systems-oriented type things. And there are some neurological correlates for that we're finding, but can't say for sure.
There might be, there should be a study just asking parents, did they pick a car or a dog first?
Yeah, so it's still anecdotal. But it's pretty hard to, once you've had a kid and you see the way your kid is, it's pretty hard to believe that gender is just drag. Like, it's pretty clear early on what kids get into, and certainly they can change over time, and certainly they can get scrambled later in life, and certainly like all that stuff can happen. But the idea that somehow like it's Barbie and television that's teaching your little girl how to be a princess is crazy. Like they take to that stuff so quick. Like little boys take to things resembling megafauna so quick. There's just something going on there. There's something going on there. What do you got? Oh, just rubbing your wrist. Okay. So let's talk about the future of masculinity. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. So I think, like I said, we're already in a metamodern cultural mode, even though our institutions and our media and our memes are still stuck in the postmodern mode. We have already more or less, as individuals, especially in the professional class, but even on down the line to everybody using the internet, has given themselves permission to play with different narratives. It's okay to play with trad. It's okay to play with modern. It's okay to play with postmodern. It's okay to figure out what the fuck are we doing here, right? Like all of this stuff is available to us. We don't have to pit them against each other if we don't want to. It's fun, right? But we don't have to. So the meta-modern mode of making meaning is atomized. We don't even barely make meaning in subcultures anymore. The meaning is located at the level of the individual, right? It's centered in the heart. What do you want out of life? And it's not looking to anyone else to tell you what you're supposed to want or what you're supposed to do, or, society is supposed to give you a job. You can't even be satisfied with that. Society can give you a job. You guys know where the recruiting office is, but it's not satisfying because we're making meaning here now, right? So that means the historical, the collective, the social, the societal, we're going to need stories that resonate with all of that. But you're going to have to individually choose how each of those resonant narratives works for you, right? So what that requires is both constructing and revealing your individual masculinity. So the stories, archetypes, and concepts that resonate with both your ego and that have enough overlap with other men that you're legible to them. You need to be legible enough to other men to effectively participate in the rituals and the homosocial governance and everything that the cult of masculinity requires of us, because it won't stay standing if we don't. So you can't go too far off the beaten path, right? Yeah, we still have to be legible to each other, but we have to find what really works for us, what really resonates with us, or we're not going to be able to be satisfied, right? And masculinity is just going to become a drag, not in the sense of a drag show, but it's going to become a big fucking burden. Okay? My personal feelings about this, the higher quality that you bring to your efforts, the more security you will experience. And I expect the greater status you will enjoy among your fellow men. Which is to say, the more that you can plug into the timeless way of doing gender, the timeless way of doing masculinity, without letting it be captured in the symbols and the stories and it doesn't have to be muscles and cars and stupid shit like that, Andrew Tate, all that kind of things, right? But like really finding what feels high quality to me about being a man, and how do I express that, right? How do I let that move through me? How do I let those stories move through me in a way that's holistic and causes human flourishing? I expect that's the way to greater status among men and greater security in your own experience of your masculinity. I firmly believe a man is never more masculine than when he is fully engaged in his life, unself-consciously, with great care and joie de vivre. Do you guys know what joie de vivre means? The joy of living, right? Strong man is a joyful man. It's a guy who loves his fucking life and is just in it, not thinking about what he looks like to who or what anybody else is saying about him. He's just living his life, doing his thing, and other people are like, damn, that's a man. Right? So the disappearance of the distinction between subject and object, flow state, is when true masculinity is least visible to the man and most visible to others. Or, right, in the words of when Bender is talking to God in that one episode of Futurama, if you're doing things right, no one's sure you're doing anything at all. So, almost there. Go back, sorry. I have one more thing to talk about. So, the metamodern masculine might look something like this, right? What is gender made of? What does it mean? So we know gender is sort of imperfectly maps onto biology. It's this kind of socially constructed and eternal thing, right? So it's historical, it's social, it's biological. It's also revealed in your character. You don't just get to pick, oh, this is what it means to be a man, right? You have to also find it. What does it mean? Like, what feels resonant to me? So one way of thinking about it, I think, is Jung's concept of the collective unconscious is really helpful here. This is something that lives in the collective unconscious, and you can sort of mine it, or you can build on it, or you can refine it. But it's not something that solely belongs to you, and it's not something that's wholly outside of you either. 2, doing a masculine inventory can be really helpful, which is to say, you remember in the last slideshow, we talked about ways that you're currently identified with masculinity, and mastery over that being disidentifying with it so that you can start to work with it in the way you want to. So no longer letting it control you, but being in control of it, right? So there's ways in which all of us are unconsciously identified with our gender, and spending time observing and taking a careful inventory of these behaviors and attitudes lets us build a plan to disidentify and master masculinity, right? So finally, I think I've said this in pieces before, it's just how I'll wrap up the slideshow. Gender is neither formless, pure performance, nor is it a rigid form, which is to say it's pure biology and genetics. Both are inseparably intertwined. So quality in gender, just as in building, means unity with the timeless ways of doing masculinity that your culture has developed. Making room for your individual genius, as well as a mythological component. So finding those resonant activities, aesthetics, and virtues that cause you to grow as a person, right? In the way that, like, when a man, like both men and women can become masters of something, right? But when a man builds mastery, he becomes more of a man, right? Both men and women can be graceful, but when a woman becomes more graceful, she becomes more of a woman. There are resonant activities in gender that cause you to grow as a human being, that cause you to build character. Find those, build your character along those axes, and then let masculinity take care of itself. Make sense? Okay. We're going to take a break right now. We will come back. We'll talk a little bit about inventory, vision, and myth. Does anybody have any questions about this presentation?
Just more of a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Something kind of clicked when you were going through sort of the evolution of masculinity across the centuries, and on the slide of like the post-war 20th century American man, like a definition for masculinity just kind of came to mind, which is something like, masculinity is how a culture defines the proper characteristics of a man in order to secure its own interests.
Yes.
So, like, the interests were evolving, so like here's what a man is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to get a woman, participate in all this, here are the proper characteristics. If you don't, that's your choice.
Yeah. Yeah. But we should never believe any narrative that gets passed to us that there is a cost-free defection from masculinity. There is not.
Yeah.
Right. That women can. Women can defect from femininity. I'm not saying it's cost-free. It's not for them, but like society will not be like, everything's going to collapse if you don't act exactly like we need you to act. Mm-hmm. But it literally will if we defect. Right. So there's a different burden there, you know. All right.
Would society collapse if women refuse to have babies?
I don't think having babies is femininity. I think having babies is female.
Okay.
I know we've talked a little bit about this. Nobody has any answers for the fertility rate crisis, but like we solved teen pregnancy and fell below replacement. So it's not like femininity was propping up us having enough babies, you know, in the past. It was just they were having them very young. And it's true. The more educated women become, the more fertility rate drops in countries. Like that's absolutely true. We know that. So there is some kind of correlation there, but I don't think it's like, I don't think there's any social mechanism that's like, we need to force women through social mechanisms to be feminine, and you can't be a woman unless you have babies, and this is somehow going to like fix the fertility rate. I don't think there's a way. Yeah.
You said if masculinity fades away, society collapses, and I was just thinking, well, if there's no people, society also collapses.
That's true. That's true. I just don't think that. I don't think that has as much to do with like society's construction of femininity as the way society's construction of masculinity perpetuates the basic safety and structure of what we do.
Yeah.
Makes sense? The stakes are lower, generally speaking. They'll keep having babies. Just nothing in the world you can do to stop women from having babies, you know.
I still feel very strongly that tending toddlers, teaching children, most teachers are women,
Mm-hmm.
correlates with femininity pretty strongly.
When you say femininity, do you mean the story our culture tells about women?
Perhaps.
I don't think the culture our story tells about women encourages them towards childcare at all.
Oh, right. Okay. Yep.
I think the story our culture tells about women is there's no such thing as femininity. You can do whatever you want, and don't ever let anybody tell you anything differently. And then, quietly incentivizes and shames them in other ways and creates a taboo structure around whether or not they can be, how feminine they are or how close to ideals they get, But they have a very kind of like schizophrenic condition that we don't. Like, at least men are pretty open about like be a man or get the fuck out. Whereas women are like, no, you can do anything. You can absolutely do anything. And then the minute you're like, oh, great, I'll do anything. Then like women are like, oh, right. It's pretty ugly, So. Anything else? All right, we'll come back for this. So everybody go ahead and take a 15-minute break and we'll come back.